Folks, it's early December. That means late season bow hunting. So if you're watching this and you still have a late season archery tag, just so you know, you're not by yourself. Yours truly is right there with you. And you know what? Together, we can get this done this year. Late season bow hunting phase one for me was the Tuesday after the rifle season. It is muzzleloader season at this time. I had off that afternoon. So what I did is I put my blaze orange on and I grabbed some cell cams that were in unproductive spots on pieces of property, even some pieces of property that weren't productive at all during the entire bow season as far as showing what I was looking for. I have 12 knock-on-door permission properties, very small properties, average around 15 to 20 acres. 2 properties are at 3 acres. So I decided to take those cell cams and I move them to areas that I know that big bucks were possibly on, or that big bucks might head into, depending upon the food sources now that were available. This year, there was a lot more standing corn, even currently right now, as I'm making this video, than there's been in years past. So I took that into account and moved those cell cameras around. That was part of phase one, going out and making those changes in the deer woods, whether they're cell cams, moving of tree stands, or just cleaning out some brush to increase shooting lanes. That was the first part of phase one, preparing for late season bow hunting. The key component now is finding that buck to hunt. This is one of the reasons why I have, and I try to always get as many properties, as small as they are, to hunt. I'm gonna tell you right now, the 12 properties that I have available, only 4 of them are going to be essentially properties I'll be hunting late season. The rest just don't meet those requirements for late season bow hunting. They're either maybe a little bit too open, they don't have any food source around them at all, they might have been overpressured by the neighbors, whatever it might be. So with that being said, the key is now finding that big buck, and how are we going to do that? Here in Wisconsin, we can still shine. Cell cams is the obvious one. If I have to, I'm going to do some observation sits. And then when we get fresh snow, just even driving down the roads and looking for where you see those fence lines coming out of a particular woods, and looking on each side of the fence line to look for fresh tracks. If you're seeing tracks, get out and try to identify if it's a big buck track. It's gonna be a little bit more about quality sits than quantity. So right now, it's finding that big buck that's still out there. Before we get into actually strategy of where to sit, one thing you have to be aware of, that the topography that you now hunt is way different and has changed. There's a lot more leaves that are off the trees big time. And in some cases where I hunt, leaves are gone completely off the trees, depending upon the type of tree. Deer, especially big bucks, can spot you very, very easily. Now, you put snow all over, and that little silhouette of yourself walking through the woods, just like you can see deer easier when it's snow, they can spot you easier during the snow. So you have to be a little more careful on your setups. Normally, October, early November, I push that envelope a little further, especially if I'm trying to get closer to a buck bedding area. Now at late season, you gotta be careful with that. And that's one thing that you do have to keep in mind. The other thing is cold weather, sound travels much further. You don't have as much moisture or humidity in the air. So when you talk, or you bang your stand against something, or you have that little buckle from your tree stand hit the side of your metal stand as you walk in, that sound can carry a long ways. Breaking sticks is another one. You have to be much more mindful of that, especially if you're going to utilize a mobile hunting system. So with that being said, utilize wind. I like days when I'm looking at a forecast that it's going to be windy midday, and then you can see that wind taper off. And I'm getting into my stand, even though sometimes, you know, these bigger bucks, some people say, well, you don't only have to hunt the last couple hours of the day. The problem with that is you're going in sometimes when it's the quietest out. So if I have to, I will go in at 11 a.m. or noon to hunt that evening hunt, because it's the windiest and essentially covering up your sound the best. So take those 2 things into consideration: is sight of deer, where they bed, and then sound. Location. If you watch anything about late season bow hunting, there's one thing that's kind of verbatim, and that's hunting food source and then placing your stands in between bedding areas, and especially bedding and food. I'm going to be doing the same thing. However, there are some caveats that I am going to end up changing just a bit. When it comes to food source, one thing that I like to look for is standing corn. And standing corn, especially here in Wisconsin, when we start to get that snow, it offers a food source up high. And the other thing with standing corn is there are some of these bigger bucks know that the only place that they have not been bothered on is that standing corn field. So standing corn acts as a food source. It can also act as a bedding area. These areas where I hunt, some of these wood lots, I call them, they're not very big. 10 acres, 15 acres, 20, 25 acres. And that's all we have for woods. And then it's the ag that's around them. So what I like to do is I like to actually set up right on those corners where deer will go from the woods into the corn. But you have to be very careful. I think a lot of people will focus on the woods area, thinking that the deer are always going to come out to the woods, out to the food source. When in some cases, the deer are actually in the food source. And then towards evening, they might come back into the woods area for whatever particular reason. So with that being said, standing corn is probably my number one component that I look for late season. The second one is winter wheat. We do have some winter wheat that is in the area. Just winter wheat, assuming that the snow isn't too deep, offers a fresh, green, viable food source for deer. So any fields that I see with winter wheat, that's another area to set up on. So yes, I'm going to be doing the traditional sitting between bedding area and food source. However, I'm going to try to get myself closer to that bedding area than I am, obviously, the field edge. And once again, it's going to have to do with sight and sound of the available cover. Because a lot of these big bucks, you have to understand, they've been pressured all year. And sometimes they're just getting up 15, 10 minutes before legal shooting light, and they're only walking 70, 100, 150 yards sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes. And where I hunt, I have extreme amount of hunting pressure around. The goal is to try to get a little bit closer to those bedding areas. That's why you have to be careful with setting on field edges, which a lot of people like to do. And, sometimes that does work, like I mentioned with the standing corn. But every little scenario is different. So standing corn, yes, I will sit on the field edge because it's essentially cover and cover, where if it's an open field, like winter wheat, hay, maybe some old soybeans, whatever it might be, then I will focus on trying to get closer to the buck's bedding area. The next thing is stand setup. And what I mean by stand setup is actually setting your stand up on the right tree that you need to be in. Also, how you face your particular stand. Now, I utilize preset stands. I do still have a couple of ladder stands. And then I also use my mobile hunting system. With that being said, though, these deer, they know these properties like the back of their hand. And one reason why I'm not the biggest fan of ladder systems or ladder stands is that in most cases, when I go up that ladder, I have to face, or usually facing the direction that I'm expecting them to come, or essentially where they're bedding from. And they can see that sometimes as you ascend that ladder, and ladder stands can tend to be a little bit noisier. I like those preset stands, even if I'm using those cheap steel sticks, where I can put those sticks on the back side of the tree. And I'm using the tree essentially as a blocker of me ascending the stand. And I'll even have that stand either right directly at them coming. So when they look at me, I blend into a bigger tree, hopefully if I'm in a bigger tree, or even a conifer or evergreen. Or I have that stand off to the side enough where I have to actually turn around and go back and shoot. And once again, I'm just trying to cover my silhouette. And I'm kind of a big dude, so I kind of look like a big blob when I'm in the tree naturally. But with that being said, stand location is very important. And I even believe how you place your stands, including sticks and where you're facing, because you are now sitting up usually in a bare tree with nothing to break your silhouette, is very, very important. Second rut. It is a real thing, and I've actually seen it go all the way to January 1st because I ended up almost getting a really nice buck about 4 or 5 years ago with the bow. And I had this buck that was chasing a doe all over on December 31st. With that being said, though, the second rut is usually about 28 days after your initial rut here in Wisconsin. That's going to put us right around that December 3rd till December 7th time frame, somewhere in there. And it's usually not as intense, but it definitely happens. And a lot of times with cameras I've seen in the past, and myself being in the woods, all of a sudden you're going to see these big bucks show up like they did during the rut, 9, 10, 11 a.m. Don't be afraid to be doing morning sits during that time frame. However, here in Wisconsin, our DNR decided to put the 4-day antlerless hunt right in the middle of the second rut. I don't understand it. I don't like it. And what that means is that you can go out in the woods, you can hunt, and you can shoot does if you have a doe tag for it. But you are not allowed, even if you have an open buck tag, archery, you are not allowed to take a buck during that 4-day time span. I want to see that changed. I don't know how. However, we have to do it, but we got to get rid of that. There's no reason for that, to have it right during that time frame. Plus, we also have in Wisconsin here the holiday hunt, which is between Christmas and New Year's, and it's the same rules apply there as far as for antlerless. You can shoot a doe or all the does you like, as many doe tags as you have open, but you are not allowed to shoot a buck. So for us late season archery hunters who like to be out in the woods this time of year, you're messing with us, DNR. And you know what? It's not making a lot of us very happy. So I'm not going to talk anymore about that, but that second rut is a true thing, and you will hunt it. You can utilize scents, whatever you would like to utilize during that first rut, the same strategies, so on and so forth. You can utilize some of those funnels, whatever it might be during that late season second rut. And then once again, those bucks will still look for does all the way through until they're done in sometimes mid-January here in the upper Midwest. So second rut is real. Get out there during that time frame, 28 days after, and be in the woods. And you can even sit all day, especially if you have a nice day late season. Weather. And if anything, weather plays a major component in your late season bow hunting. I like it cold. The colder, the better. And I'm talking if we can get even down into those negative temps for a daytime high. The key is to be prepared for it. I utilize a heater bodysuit. I love that heater bodysuit. That is my late season clothing article that comes with me to make sure that I can stay on stand and not fidget or, essentially get cold and move. But when it comes to weather, though, what I'm really focusing on are those post-cold fronts. And what I'm keeping an eye on, that weather. Usually you get that snowstorm that'll come in, or even maybe just really high winds, no snow, whatever it might be. And then those temperatures drop big time. And when those temps drop big time, those deer, just to keep up their calorie intake, they have to move. And some of those deer, or I should say some of those bigger bucks will move in morning. But a lot of times those bigger bucks will still hold off, and then they'll wait for that evening component. The thing what I do notice, though, with those big bucks is when it comes to late season cold fronts, they'll bump that time up a little bit sooner. So instead of maybe getting out to that field edge, half hour after dark or right at that legal shooting light, all of a sudden you might see them come up an hour before the end of legal shooting light. So keep that in mind. And then these cold fronts can concentrate deer more too from a bedding perspective. When it's cold and it gets that cold, you know that they're going to be on those sunny slope sides of a hill on the backside of the wind, or once again into cedars, pines, anywhere that breaks up the wind from them. The other thing too is snow. Cedar trees right here, when it gets a lot of snow around here in Wisconsin, you can walk under these thick pines and thick cedars, and it's going to be open area and essentially dry for them too. Once again, don't be afraid to focus on these evergreens throughout your season. The other thing I want to mention too, food source wise, these cedars are a great food source late season. So they have their cover and they also have a food source too. So don't overlook cedar trees for that perspective. Cold weather is key to me and cold weather is king. So when everybody is bundling up inside and they don't want to even step outside to go get the mail, that's your time to go out and play and be out in the deer woods, because those deer are going to move. Deer become more patternable again. And you know what? You just got to put in the work. And I think that's the only other thing that maybe separates the late season bow hunter from the rest of the crowd, is that you have to put in the work, and you're going to have to suffer a little bit, meaning you're going to have to be okay with having cold hands, frostbite face, facing into a 20-mile-an-hour wind, whatever it might be. Those things aren't always comfortable. It endures a little bit of suffering. But the thing of it is, it just makes that big buck that you get in late season that much sweeter, because you knew the work and the effort that you put into it to get the job done. Remember to keep practicing in the backyard. Just because it's late season doesn't mean that we don't stop practicing with our bows. Also, be positive, be confident who you are as a bow hunter, and be immune to cold weather. You see that cold weather? Bring it on. May your arrow fly true, and that you get that buck that you're after. Until next time, Clint from Oak and Iron Outdoors.